Hello everyone, welcome to another live hangout here at Voice Essentials. Today is special guest day, so I'm going to be introducing you to a wonderful lady, Dr. Trineice Robinson Martin, and Dr. Trineice has been on the show before. We'll talk more about that in a moment, but yeah, I hope you're well wherever you are on the planet, and a big shout out to all of those of you who watch or listen back to the show as a like a podcast / replay. You know, even though you're not with us live, I do know that you're all listening, and it's so good to have so many people you know, chiming in and tuning into the show. And yeah, for those of you who are interested, you can just listen to it as a kind of like a podcast. I don't do a podcast officially, but here on YouTube you can just hit play and away we go. And today is going to be a great show to listen back to, because Dr. Trineice is a world leader in Black American music pedagogy, voice teaching, and I'm really looking forward to our discussion with her today. I think it's going to be great. And yeah, it's going to be a lot of fun. This is why I always meet up with my guests about half an hour before the show starts, because we have to iron out all the tech issues, and inevitably there are tech issues, and we had tech issues today with the audio. So we've done our best. I think it was my end, but we've done our best to iron that all out. If we have audio issues, everyone, please excuse me. We work through them. I think we'll be fine. As always, the wonderful Linda will let me know in the Google Doc to make sure. So I think we should be good to go. As I said, I'm really looking forward to today's chat. I've got you know, selfish reasons, which I'm sure will become more than revealed as the show goes on. I look forward to introducing Dr. Trineice Robinson Martin straight after this.
Sound check. Check 1, check 2.
Okay, let's give the audio a run through first. How are we going?
Good, right? Everything's well.
Woohoo! We are on. That is great. So good to catch up with you again, Trineice. Thank you for joining me on the show today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. It's always a pleasure to hang out with you.
We have known each other for a little while now. We were, I mean, the first time you came on the show was March 11, 2019. I looked that up. So it has been 3.5 years since we were which, you know, COVID's just robbed us of what feels like 2 or 3 years, right?
You're absolutely right. Because I was going to say, it does not seem like it's been that long.
It doesn't seem like it's been that long, but it has. But we have known each other for much longer than that, and we're going to talk about your book in a moment. This wonderful tome. We'll get to that in a second, but we kind of got to know each other because we didn't author it. We authored chapters each.
Right.
And do you know what? I went into this, and did you know that your chapter and my chapter sit right next to each other?
Well, you know, it's funny because when that first came out and we first met, and I was like, who is Daniel Robinson? Is this my cousin? I always tell you that. I always tease about that. And, you know, so, I mean, that happens to do something on Christian music. It was like, really?
Yeah, yeah. It was crazy, right? So, you know, I'm chapter 19, you're chapter 20. And, yeah, so that was 2014. Can you believe it?
That's just...
Yeah,
amazing.
That's a long time. That is a long time ago. I didn't mention this at the beginning of the show. I'm feeling quite old today, because yesterday my daughter turned 21.
Wow, congratulations.
Yes.
Yeah, I feel the same. I mean, my daughter just started driving, and she's
right.
17. She's a senior in high school, so
Uh-huh.
you know, I'm not that
my second eldest, he's 17. He's currently, in fact, he's just booked his driving test to do his license. So yeah, it's crazy times, right? Crazy times.
Crazy times.
Yeah. So let's stop talking about how old we're both getting. Mind you, you don't look like you've aged a bit since I last saw you. But nonetheless, let's talk about this, because when was this? I'm looking in here to remind myself when this was published. It's only recently, really, 2017. Yeah, so you want to sing gospel. And this has kind of become almost the go-to text for so many people all over the world, right? Tell us how it is. Well, I guess we probably should, for those playing at home and who have never, had the pleasure of meeting you before, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then maybe tell us a bit about how it is you came to be, writing one of the world's leading pedagogy books for gospel.
Well, thank you for asking that question. I am just so pleased and just so honored to be in the space, to be able to talk about and understand my culture. Literally, that's what this journey has been about, is how do I bring voice science and voice pedagogy strategies, how do I bring applied teaching strategies into teaching a style of music and genres of music that have come out of gospel music and other Black American music styles in a way that has its own integrity, and it's not looked at or explained through another style, particularly classical music. So I did my doctorate at Teachers College, Columbia University. Actually, I did my second master's and doctorate there. My bachelor's and my first master's are in jazz studies. So when I got to start doing my doctorate work, I really wanted to do a pedagogy of soul in general. And then because I'm also a PK and I have a very strong religious background, recognizing historically how gospel music really has its tentacles in all of Black American music from slavery to present. I mean, coming out of spirituals and all of these things, it was the perfect place to really explore what pedagogy means for Black American music, and especially what does pedagogy mean within a formal teaching and academic context. So that was where a lot of my research stemmed from, and it literally stemmed from me wanting to know the answers and not being able to find those answers. That just, like, what is this? How can we, in America, have this beautiful music and not be the leading pedagogues, from a textbook standpoint on how to sing this music? And I understand that it's a cultural thing and it's much more layered than that. But I wanted to make sure that I do my part in making sure that a lot of things get documented in a way that is culturally viable and culturally respectful.
Yeah,
so, and that's where all of this came from. And
I want to dive down. I mean, that's kind of my little personal reason for having you on today, is because I want to really talk about cultural appropriation and those. So we're going to get into that today, hopefully. But isn't it interesting how your story, your own, experiences, it's such an, I think you and I have talked about this before, because it's exactly the same journey for me. I, grew up in the church singing contemporary worship material, and it was me trying to go to the books and go, where am I listed? Well, I'm not here. Yeah,
yes.
And partly I think because, and I think I expect that you'd agree with this observation, contemporary music, contemporary pedagogy has only really in the last 20 to 30 years started to really mature in the research. And so there's in one sense we were kind of coming in at the beginning, haven't we?
Absolutely.
In many respects. And so it was my journey that also led me to write on contemporary worship singing. But I, in fact, funny little note, one of the reviewers for my doctoral work, actually one of the comments, I was asked to add something more about Black American music, gospel, within my doctoral thesis. And so, because I didn't feel in any way, shape or form able to really comment, because that had not been my experience. So I was able to write a little a little mention, you know, acknowledging that much of what I was looking at had its roots back in such a strong historical tradition. Now I'm getting ahead of myself. You're going to be giving a keynote at the the Australian National Association for Teachers of Singing conference, and I had Shannon Coates on a couple of weeks ago, and as you know, Shannon's an absolute blast.
Yes,
and she's also providing a presentation, a keynote for, and I had already, when I learnt that you both were doing the keynote, I was so bummed, because I decided I wasn't going to go to the conference. The first one I haven't been to in forever, and I thought, how can I find out what these gals are going to be talking about? And I thought, I know.
I love it.
I'll just get them onto the live show. And I'll just get them to do their keynote for me and my wonderful community here at Voice Essentials. And so I'm so keen to really take a deep dive, if you will, as much as a deep dive can be in a chat for 40 minutes, about singing gospel, about the pedagogy, and because I dare say over the last number of years, you yourself have been really developing and refining your approach and the way you're delivering this information. Can you segue us into talking us through, you know, Black American music?
Yeah,
and
really, what would be great? So, you know, my education brand is Soul Ingredients.
Yep.
And I have spent these last, I guess now, 13 years, you know, since graduating, on really, it first started by figuring out, well, what is gospel music pedagogy? How do you teach Black music, Black American music, soul music, in a way that's going to be culturally viable, yet at the same time responsible? And what I started to recognize is my whole passion for teacher training and teacher education, and really approaching how you deal with the voice and how you deal with the artist from the standpoint of those parameters that are important within the Black community and what are in the Black American music community. You know, the crazy part is that in academia, because this is obviously where I live, right? I live in academia, and you start to compare the pedagogies and you start to recognize that, oh, okay, well, if most formal pedagogy is centered in this kind of elite classical European music, which has a lot of its parameters on assessment, they're assessment driven. You know, are you holding these notes out the proper way? Do you have the proper resonance? There's all of these different aspects. And sometimes when that's found within academia, you lose a lot of, you know, a lot of the point, right?
Yeah.
So when you apply those parameters and that mindset to teaching a style of music where that's not the point at all, then what ends up happening, and this is something that I found year after year, especially the more that I travel, is that you find these people that are like, I'm going to teach folks how to sing soul, and they are technically correct, but they are not saying anything. Technically correct, but not saying anything. So, and these are the things that I started to recognize where my work has now moved. It's more so, how do we teach functional voice training, but artistry through the lens of Black American voice pedagogy? And it's bringing in those parameters that are most important. And one of the most important things, if not the most important thing, in Black American music is functional. It has a function, it has a purpose, it has an intention. And if it's not doing something, then it loses a bit of its traditional rooting. So when you're going out to sing, your function, just like having this conversation, I'm not going to have a conversation with you for you to just stare at me. Right? I'm going to be waiting for you to go, I understand. Yes. You're smiling back. Right? So if we recognize that this is something that is the root of where our academic training, particularly for artistry, needs to go, for music making needs to go, or needs to acknowledge primarily, then you're going to get another pathway into how you teach the voice and what it is that you focus on first in the development of the singer, regardless of the style that they're singing. So that's where I'm at now. So,
do you think,
it's like not just gospel voice, is how does gospel pedagogy affect all popular music styles, all classical music styles? What happens if we start from that aspect instead of the technical? Not that it's not important, but what if we start from another window?
It's interesting. I love your use and recognition of the fact that it's functional. Do you think that part of the challenge, so part of the challenge is that in many respects contemporary music within white culture is quite performative, so it doesn't necessarily hold that functional,
importance.
And so I'm immediately thinking of Sister Act, right? Whoopi Goldberg, and we've got this display of Black American music, but yet when it's received through that white lens, if I might be so bold, we immediately create a performance out of it, and yet that's, I'm hearing you say that that's not what's being actually delivered. There's a far more functional aspect to this genre.
Absolutely. And the thing about that is when you see like people within like the music theater realm that understand that function, then all of a sudden they stand out as someone having soul and being extremely compelling, right? Because it becomes more than the performative. It's like, no, this is me telling you my story. And they become so compelling and so believable that you forget that it's actually a play, right?
Yeah.
So I think that these are the ideas that when we're teaching students, and particularly if we're teaching students from genres that are in the Black American music tradition, that they have to recognize that it's functional, and they have to recognize that it's for a purpose. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to bring the audience to a collective sense of joy? Are you trying to bring them to a sense of sorrow? Do you want them to feel sorry for you? Do you want to encourage them? Do you want to charge them to do something else? Like, what is it that you're there to do? It's like when you're coming into a conversation, like I mentioned before, what are you here to say? I tell my students, you have 3 to 5 minutes. How are you going to affect the people in your room? What are you there for? What are you going to say? And make sure you choose the repertoire that makes sense for what it is that you really want to say and how you want to move the people that are listening to you.
I'm listening to our conversation, and I'm processing this on the fly. So excuse me if this doesn't come out, sounding clear and clever. But I say all the time here on the channel, I say it to my students all the time, that singing is about communication. Singing is not about perfect notes. And in one sense, I'm really saying singing is not about performance. Singing is about function. It's about the delivery of intent. And so I wonder whether there is a sense in which when we step back from the delineation of black, white, different cultures, is it that Black American music just simply never lost the fact that music is about communication, and for whatever reason, other cultures fell into the performative, I went to say trap, it's not necessarily a
Right.
trap, but
No, it's not a trap. You know, and it's not even a hierarchy.
no.
But it is. But what it is a cultural function. What one of the things that you want to recognize, and this is where the historical aspect comes into play, right? Coming all the way through slavery,
Yeah.
music has always had a function,
Yeah.
right? So slaves could sing because their masters saw that they were more productive,
Yeah.
right? That's where you get work songs and all of these different
Yeah.
aspects from.
Yeah.
And as a result, if culturally you're accustomed to singing with purpose, whether it's to work, whether it's to communicate slyly, whether it is to escape from the oppressive bondage that you may be in, either physically or mentally, then you have a habit of the function of the music being able to bring you out of that situation. And those that subscribe to this cultural tradition recognize the function that music has in their lives and has no need or desire for it to be something else. And I think that is one of the things that makes it greater, because as you were saying, why is it that it's never lost? Because it always maintained its function. Its function, it's always to escape. It's always to be better. It's always to uplift. It's always to enjoy. You know, so it's not just, oh, I'm going to sing this song because technically it's going to show you how viable I am as a trained performer, right? You know, it's quite interesting, you know, when I'm saying this out loud, because as I'm doing a lot of the teacher trainers training institutions and working with all of these different organizations, one of the things that is the biggest issue is most traditional voice pedagogy, when we're talking about repertoire, is centered on technical development. Oh, well, what is the right rep for this person based upon beginner, intermediate? You know what I mean? And it's always technique driven.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's very difficult. I mean, you can shape it into these aspects, but it's a very difficult approach to shape things based upon, oh, I'm going to do this because it only has this particular range. Why? Because Black American music is so individual. It is so improvised. Everyone brings, you can make any song complex or it can be simple. So to simply say, oh, I'm going to give you this sheet of music because this is going to be easy, ends up being not a model. So these are just one of the little ways that it doesn't just fit into the classical European pedagogic model as, you know, maybe some of the other styles of music that may be more performative just by nature, right? Where you're actually having to perform it as it's written. You're actually having to honor the composer in such a way that you are trying to interpret what you do very more so as the composer has instructed you to do. Whereas in the Black community, in Black American music, we're talking about a genre where the interpreter, the artist, is just as valued as the composer, right? We celebrate Duke Ellington, but we celebrate Ella Fitzgerald, right? We celebrate Whitney Houston. You know, and sometimes people don't even know who wrote the song.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So this is something that you want to think about in terms of, if I'm developing an artist, if I'm developing a young singer, you know, what is it that I'm developing? I'm developing, this is why it's called soul ingredients. Sing your soul, all of that is about, I'm developing your ability to tell your story through music, period.
Yeah.
You know, so how do I give you those tools to do that? How do I train your voice in a way that's going to do that? And then all of the ways, all of the things, all of the trips that people end up having in terms of like where we're going to talk about, if we have time, the cultural appropriation things, they don't become a thing. Because are you telling your story? What are you telling? Why are you singing the song?
Uh-huh.
And does this tell your story? Is this your story, or is this a story that you can tell, or is this, you know, what is the function? If you have a function within it, then you end up avoiding the traps that people end up going to because they're trying to check a box.
Uh-huh. Interesting.
You know?
Yeah. In one sense, I guess, again, thinking through what you're saying, is it I hear that we've actually got three equals at the table, one being the performer telling their story, one being the original composer who has, you know, written the piece, but then the other being the function / culture that speaks into the nature, and those three come together to form the outcome. I'm avoiding the word performance.
Well, no, but you know, it is the conversation. It informs the musical conversation.
Yeah.
Just like any conversation that we have, right? You know, what I need to say versus what am I scheduled to say, right? What if I prepare to talk about versus what do I feel about what I prepared? How am I conveying what I feel about? Do you feel the passion in me caring about what I'm saying when I'm talking? Do you feel that I care about it more so than you hear my words? So they become equal. And then the third element, as you're talking about, is the culture. Well, that can change, that can grow, that can vary depending upon the setting. And it doesn't make you less you. It just means that in this particular setting, I might express it in this way. And in this particular setting, I might express it in this way. You know, what I do at my mother's house is going to be different than what I do with my friends, right?
Yeah.
But I'm still me, especially if I'm telling the same story.
And so
right? There might be a little shift.
Is this why we hear, because I love the way you're expressing this idea of it being a conversation. Is this why we hear in a lot of gospel expressions a lot of call and response? Because it is literally a conversation. Is that what's going on there?
I mean, verbatim. I mean, the fact that you're nodding your head, like, that's a part of it.
Yeah.
I mean, when you go into a black church and the preacher is speaking and you're not saying, all right, amen, with the signifying, he will literally say, or she will literally say, I'm going to need you to talk back to me. And, you know, I adapt those aspects, again, growing up in the church, where even if I'm in the Zoom space, I'm going to be like, hello, I need to see your face, and I need you to nod. Even if you're going to be on mute, I need you to nod. I need you to say, okay, right? Because it's always having that dynamic where we are in conversation, and you care about what I'm saying just as much as you care about me. Yeah. Right. And I'm caring about you. And it's got to be this continuous dialogue, you know, and you'll also hear that's why soul singers will always say, I only sing songs that I can feel. If I can't feel it, I'm not going to sing it. Like, that's a thing. You have to, because in order to bring yourself into the music and really tell your story from a genuine place, you have to have some sort of relationship with what you're singing about at that moment.
That's interesting to hear you say that, you know, soul singers will only ever sing what they feel, because I find myself only wanting to sing songs that I inherently, that give me a visceral sense of connection. And so I, you know.
And the thing about it is, I think that is the appropriate, I shouldn't put a bias on there. I'm placing a particular bias, but if I'm allowed to put my bias, I think that that's what music training should be. How can I help you tell your story? And the only way that I can put that into the ideas that it is that when you're getting ready to sing, you're not worried about the notes. Right? Because when you first start learning, it's about, well, can I meet these parameters? Can I do these things? Versus if I'm teaching you from the beginning, if you don't feel this, you know, like Marie Kondo, if you hold this and it doesn't bring you joy, if you've ever heard of the organization Guru, but seriously, if you're holding a song and a song is in your heart and it's not bringing you joy, why can't we make that the cultural norm, which is what it is within the black church, particularly, which is what it is in soul singing, which is what it is when you're singing the blues, which is what it is when you're singing jazz. You know, Why can't you, from the beginning, instill that that is a crucial part of your musical development? What do you feel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a question here, or a statement from Stevie, saying only blacks can and should do music. I take they're referring to gospel, because only they understand, the things of slavery. And I guess this question gets to the heart of cultural appropriation, right? I guess, and as a white middle class privileged man, I get nervous around wanting to do the right thing. I think a lot of people like Stevie here are almost certainly wanting to do the right thing. But I hear you saying that as long as you're telling your story, you're avoiding that cultural trap. Is that right?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. As long as you're telling your story, because at the end of the day, a lot of the slave songs, and again, except for when you're talking about words or stories that are specific to an experience,
right?
That are specific to an experience. But when you're talking about spirituals, as far as I'm concerned, or as long as I know, we're all human. We have these human tendencies that allow us to hurt, and that allow us to feel alone, that allows us to feel oppressed, that allows us to feel not good enough, that allows us to feel like we need to overcome. So when we understand songs for what is it doing, what does it mean, then if you can sing "We Shall Overcome" when you know what oppression feels like, when you've experienced those things. And if you haven't experienced it, then either you are singing it in a place of empathy to say, you know what, I'm tired of seeing the oppression around me, and I'm doing something about it, and I'm going to join with my oppressed brothers and sisters and sing along. Then you are not appropriating, you are appreciating.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So these are the things. What I'm saying is if you take the music and you bring it into who you are and why you are saying. I say soul singing, my definition that I always lead with is soul singing is the unapologetic, passionate communication of who you are, what you believe, and how you feel about it. The thing that makes it so profound in the Black American music is that I'll say words are not just weighted, because, we'll say in the performative sense, I love you, I need you, right? That's weighted. No, in the Black American music, words are loaded, because when they're weighted, the weight has all of the experiences behind you. When you say, I love you, that love is actually demonstrating all of the different experiences that make up what that weight is. And as a result, it has a certain sound to it, right? So it's always bringing the experiences into the phrasing. And this comes again back to slavery, when you can't use that many words to articulate. You can't be so detailed about how you feel about who's treating you bad. Right?
Yeah.
So then you start to understand, you start to get these subtleties, these cultural isms where you'll look, right? A look will be like, okay, you don't even have to say nothing, right? All of these things. And I think that, I do think that this is something that is culturally shared by social demographic, more so than race, particularly social economic demographic. When you are in environments where you are not the powered majority and you cannot speak freely, you have to have these code languages, regardless of your racial ethnicity or your ethnicity. There's a move against using the word race because we're all in a human race. But regardless of your ethnicity, you have these human traits where you're like, okay, wait, kids do it all the time with their parents. They think they're slick. They should know that we wrote the book on that. But they think they're slick, and they'll try to be making code words as if we don't see them or hear them, right?
Yeah.
So it's that same concept, and that's the kinds of things that are just being maintained within the music. That's that tradition for those that are singing within that tradition. That's what they are bringing into the music. And what I find is, I particularly found with my colleagues that teach African American art song, you know, or my Black opera singer colleagues, whom I did not even realize, to the certain extent, because, you know, I hadn't really been around as many of my colleagues as I have met in the last year. Glory, like, that's another story. But just talking to them and talking and them being a part of my work and whatnot, and saying most profoundly that this is how they teach classical music anyway. This is always how they've taught classical music. And I was like, wow. So you're bringing that tradition, you're bringing that viewpoint into this through composed setting. You know, in the books, that's not captured. Those ideas, those pedagogies aren't captured when you read anything on classical music pedagogy.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So to hear my colleagues, you know, talk about these aspects within the context of even classical music, that's when you step back and like, man, this is definitely a cultural perspective.
Yeah.
It's a cultural perspective, but one I think that definitely warrants being shared, because I think that's why people love music. That's why people are compelled, because they want to be moved.
Yeah. Right? And I love the passion with which you're, you know, communicating with us, and that same passion is, we get to observe that within the art form, right? Within Black American music. I wanna just, because I've just looked down at the time. This
so
always
fast.
happens with my guests, because I get such excellent guests on. We're always running out of time. Anyway, I just want to turn our attention, if you would, to the one of the challenges within contemporary pedagogy is we have to be able to manage the voice within what are often very passion-driven expressions. And passion, when it's completely unfettered, when it's completely let loose, can wreak havoc with the voice. How do we manage, and I am moving us to a technical sort of space, but how does someone, you know, who's wanting to really drive the passion in their communication, how can they manage the voice so that same passion doesn't turn around and bite them with some vocal wear and tear?
Well, I'll tell you something. I think one of the things, and this is again coming from this kind of cultural expression, when culture meets science, my course, when science meets soul, right? The thing that we often forget is that in our everyday lives, if we are not conditioned to speak freely and express ourselves freely, then when we get into these moments where we're pouring out our soul, there's going to be that thing on the back that says, hold back. Oh, keep your composure. And it's that fight. It's the holding back that makes your throat close. It's the holding back that's where you're trying to control it, like, so that I don't want to be out of control, right? What we don't teach is release, right? The only reason that passionate singing for someone would be harmful is because they're holding back so they can control it. And then they're like, oh my gosh, I have all this passion, I'm just so emotional, but I'm stuck. Versus like, oh my gosh, I have all this emotion. All I want you to do is believe who I am and what I'm saying. There's flow, there's energy, there's movement. And I think that has to be a part of the conditioning, particularly when you are not raised in or not accustomed to being able to communicate in a place of flow. So that's the technical aspect that brings in these cultural experiences and these cultural ideas. You know, another thing that I always say, talking about from a technical standpoint, when we are belting, or if we're singing in church, right? And I always tell my singers that you can't go to choir rehearsal after work, being tired, sitting down in your chair, and then go, Jesus, right? Because that's not normal, right? It's just not, that's not how we communicate.
No.
If we're ever speaking or communicating in that pitch range, our body is much more engaged. We don't stand still and then try to do these different things. Like, that's unnatural. And I really, really believe that if we understand, the more we understand about how the voice works and bring in these cultural aspects, bring in these tendencies that can put them together, you can start to navigate this kind of passionate aspect without feeling like you have to, quote unquote, control it. The only thing you're controlling is the release. It's I'm breathing in and I'm releasing it. And then that's where you, as the singer, become healed, because you don't feel like you're fighting. You feel like you're going, oh my gosh, right? I wish kids, lost their voice crying. I'm just saying, right? This is a primal release of a lot of sound.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
This is a lot of sound. So there's something to think about when that. So if you're training someone to scream, if you're training someone to do all of these different things, if you're not training them to release the energy, then you're going to have problems. And if their release of their energy is nowhere near the way they communicate, nowhere near their normal, like, I'm an animated person. I mean, you've known me for almost 10 years now. I think 2013, right? I have been the same person, right? So that's just a part of who I am.
Yeah.
But if I was one that just kind of talked like this all the time, I think I would probably be very tired, right? And then all of a sudden I'm going to be, this boisterous singer. That's night and day.
Yeah.
The body is not conditioned to do that. And so, yes, those people that all of a sudden decide, because they think it's cool to cry like somebody else, yes, they're going to have some technical issues. Yes, it's going to take them a long time to train a viable sound that is going to be responsible for their instrument. And as long as they know that and they're willing to take that journey, okay. But if they don't know that and they're expecting these things and they just kind of go for it, it's going to be some problems.
Yeah. Yeah. I often say here in the studio, and I've said it a few times here on the show, that it's, we're ultimately in search of an optimal setting, aren't we, for the voice, and optimal is going to look a bit different for everyone. But we certainly, I think it is possible to overdrive the voice in a manner that does have too much tension, that can lead to wear and tear. But equally, as you're saying, we can underservice the voice, we can under-energize the voice, and that too can lead to a certain level of wear and tear. And so
that's where I'm saying is that the overdrive that we're doing muscularly usually is us trying to be a sound. Yeah. Right? The overdrivingness is our desire to do more than we actually, instead of just being. Yeah. So I think that but if you don't know that that's a thing, you're just like, oh, well, that's, I'm angry and I only know how to be angry and hold myself together. Yeah. Because I wasn't taught to do anything differently. Yeah. Right? And I think that's why a part of where I am is like bringing in these other behavioral aspects to the pedagogy, to the science. Like, yes, the constrictor muscles are closed. Why are they? Yeah. Why? Because they're trying to hold steady, because you're trying to hold back, because there's so much power coming out and I don't know what to do with it. Yeah. And I think because what we're identifying is this flow phonation, that we're wanting to have this release, as you say. The interesting thing I find about, when we start using terminology like flow and release and just expressing oneself, one can make, I think, the mistake, as people are listening, there could be the mistake to be heard that the suggestion we're making is that just be natural and it'll all come. And human bodies rarely do things in an optimal way naturally. We do
often need to develop and refine that capacity for flow, that capacity for release?
Well, I would argue that we do a lot of things naturally, but we can't sustain them.
Ah, interesting.
I think that's a difference. I think when we're just kind of in our animated self, we don't stop to think about what's the placement, right? But if we're trying to sustain that particular behavior, that takes conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm totally understanding what you're saying and how you're saying it, but kind of putting it in the perspective that no, you're not creating a sound that doesn't exist naturally per se.
Yeah, I love that.
I mean, you know,
I love that addition. That addition to what I'm saying of condition. It is about conditioning, and it's we have to pull up stumps. It's we are out of time. Did we cover anything that you're going to be doing in your ANATS? Chat?
Actually, I mean, this is the topic that we're going to be talking about. Now, of course, in ANATS, I'm talking to a bunch of voice teachers, so I'm going to be a lot more academic in the conversation in terms of bringing in like particular terms and talking about which basically what this is a culturally responsive teaching within the voice studio. Like, what does that mean and how does that imply it? So it's going to be a different kind of conversation, but the point of it is going to be the same.
Yeah.
The point of it is going to be the same. So that means you have to come. That means you have to come.
I'm not going to make it, unfortunately, but I am so glad that you made the time to hang out. Because what time is it in your part of the world right now?
It is 11:48 p.m.
Hey, we'll get you to bed by midnight, I promise.
It's great, but you were worth staying up for.
Oh, you are too kind. I love having you on the show because of your passion, because of your ability to communicate so clearly. What is very freeing, to hear you talking about cultural appropriation and those sorts of topics, and I've got a lot to really chew over and think on that you've talked us through today. So thank you so much for coming on the show, and let's try not to leave it another 3.5 years before you come on again.
Absolutely. Well, I'm telling you, I'm going to start a teacher training program online with Soul Ingredients, and when I do that, I'm going to call you and be like, Dr. Dan, let's get back on, because I've got to talk about this teacher training academy that I'm doing.
Let's do it. We will do that, and I look forward to being able to do that with you. So thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you. So there you go, everyone. I told you she's a blast. She's a lot of fun, but so informed and so well researched and experienced. I mean, she's releasing her own albums in Black American music and performing in gospel and doing all these things all the time. A reminder of the book, it's that one there. So You Want to Sing Gospel, a guide for performers. Brilliant. Please grab yourself a copy of that. Earlier on in the chat, I did see someone ask, I think it was actually Kelly. Kelly was asking after that book, the Red Book, where I've got a chapter and Dr. Trineice also has a chapter. But can I be honest with you, Kelly, and say, I don't know that you'd be able to get a copy of that anymore. That is like high, like super academic sort of speak stuff. It's got chapters by a whole heap of pedagogues from all over the globe. But I don't know. You could look it up. Springer is the publisher. Thank you, everyone, for chiming in. We will now have a week break, so I will see you in 2 weeks' time when we'll do a Q&A. We'll be back for what is in the Southern Hemisphere the fourth quarter of the year. So we'll be back next week. I'm going to be doing pre-records for the channel here, and so I'll be doing that and not doing a live show. But we'll be back in 2 weeks. Don't forget to subscribe, hit the white bell icon so you always get the notifications of when we go live every Monday, 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time, because we regularly have amazing guests, just like Dr. Trineice, come on the show, leading experts in their field, and I don't want you to miss out on any of them. So I look forward to seeing you again very soon, in 2 weeks actually. I'm Dr. Dan. Sing well.